The idea for this talk came about when I was working with Matt Hayes in 2018 in a bank that doesn't exist anymore. Well, okay, fine. It does exist. It just changed its name to NatWest. Previously, it was called RBS. And at that time, we've actually started doing something that I would like to present to you today. In the meantime, we've actually started a company called Humble Associates together with two other wonderful coaches. And this is what we use on a daily basis. Hopefully, you'll enjoy the war stories. This talk will be full of my personal stories and my personal opinions. Take it as you will. I would be surprised if you agreed with all of that. My purpose for today is just to maybe expose some of my thoughts and maybe trigger some of yours. So let's see. Okay, let's click on it. Right, me. I'm Thomas, but everyone calls me TK. How do people call me TK? It's a long story, I guess. It's actually also my initials. I tend to think about myself as a coach. I remember when I had this slide full of certificates and client names, but now I maybe cringe a bit when I think about that. I tend to talk about myself as the one sitting in the corner, trying to connect the dots. I help organizations through change, and I'm really having fun doing it. Well, it's not always fun, but I definitely feel like I've changed the world for a better place if I manage to succeed and connect the right dots and my clients actually can get value from it. So I'll be your guide today through the process of getting unstuck with change. You might have seen and heard about the Prime Directive. This is something that is used in Scrum and Agile perspectives. It's all about everyone trying their best. So we assume that everyone does what they do from the goodness of their heart, from their best intentions. No one really, not many people fail on purpose. I think that everyone's trying to do their best, even if it's unfortunately sometimes guided by twisted logic. But there is always something that makes people tick, and there is always something that people try to do positively. And this talk is designed from this perspective. I'm criticizing some things, but it's not because I feel that people are doing things on purpose that don't work. It's because, it's because of what I would like to say here, which is embracing any transformational change, like for instance, new ways of working, agile and lean, on the face of it, it's so great. Why would anyone not want it? I today actually I spoke to a board with one of our clients, and actually the CEO was saying, "Oh, what's the problem? Just get them to do these small iterations. Just chop chop. It should be fine." But the problem was that it wasn't. It just isn't as easy as that. However, you would only know that if you tried a couple of times and failed. I guess in the mind of the CEO, it sounds so easy. It just sounds like a great idea for him. Let's just do it. A couple of years ago, I worked in a different bank. And what they did is they hired a very, very expensive consultancy, and they constructed an Agile COE. They've put people in there with backgrounds of, communication, technology, training, diversity. No one with the background of change. And, what I've seen is an interesting phenomenon. You probably have heard of the Kruger-Dunning effect, which is, some call it Mount stupid, but I think it's unfair. It's just when you read about something or learn about something at first, there is so much of a knowledge increase that it's easy to think you're an expert. Unfortunately, we rarely are. It's actually quite comical. So Dean Lachana, one of the coaches in London, once had a great talk about why agile transformations fail. I don't want to repeat it here. I've got my own examples. But the fact is, there's various studies, but it's just around 70% of them just fail. And it's just, wow. I think it's comedic in a slapstick way. It's like in this movie when, you know that this character is going to be hit by a wooden plank. You're preparing for a laugh, they get hit, and you laugh. And this is how I see most of the transformations, as in they're always destined to fail. People in the organization or people helping the organization seem to be ignorant to what we, as the viewers of slapstick comedy, would find obvious. I've got some observations of my own, actually, why it might be happening. Although probably it's not an exhaustive list. I think the first thing is it's very hard to see beyond your own horizon. So we all look at the world from our own point of view. That's an obvious thing. A good example of that would be what's happening in the world right now. There's a huge debate in all parts of the world about what the world of work will look like. How much people should work remotely, in a hybrid way, maybe completely from home. And I found that it's all a matter of personal circumstance and opinion. Now, some people really love working from the office and can't see how they can be effective other than face to face. Some people think that, presenteeism and the daily commute is just a total waste of time, and they found themselves more productive working from home. I find myself really looking to work remotely, but the fact is I have to accept that my point of view isn't the only one. And if my life circumstances were different, I would have a different point of view that I can clearly see. The thing is, the technologists see technology. Finance people see money. The HR sees resources. It's hard to see the true image of the system when you're a part of it. It really requires a lot of systems thinking skills to look beyond the horizon to what you can't see. And it's one of the reasons why transformative change is really hard. Another is what lies beyond the horizon is these funny characters. As I should probably have an image of, trolls, demons, or such, but, I like these ones. They're quite funny. Strange as hell. So, yeah, it's like, the Agile Manifesto says nothing about people's identities tied to their roles or, like how to change the annual budgeting cycle. But these things are tremendously important, and they're just examples. No kidding, really. And, when you go at it from the point of view of like, yeah, the world is such a great place, we'll just implement Scrum. These things, like people's roles, career paths, for instance, progression of careers, and they even call it officers' grades in investment banking, have been there for hundreds of years. And when you encounter something like this kind of a sleeping giant, to change it seems insurmountable. And it can be like a slab of concrete that can weather any wave. It's really hard to do anything, and it's really easy to fail when you can't see that in place. Oh, that's one of my favorites. We need the buy-in from top management, people say. This really cracks me up. To be honest, because it's statistics, I think most people have no idea what it means to be a senior leader. No idea what goes through their minds. And, we're just putting cartoons out because it's just a strange brand of people. I've talked with many senior leaders, and it just feels like you're constantly holding the world on your shoulders, and everyone comes to you with questions. It's constant pressure and constant decision making. It's a life of constant trade-offs. And when I see a person like that and really emphasize with them, asking them to invest in a dogma is not usually the best opinion, right? Doing, it's like, oh, really support me in implementing this new way of work or new philosophy of work. I can't see these people buying into that unless they've been through the journey themselves. It's not about convincing them, it's about emphasizing. And as hard as it is, I do really value leaders. And I do really value leaders looking over my shoulder. I personally don't mind a leader questioning what I do. It keeps me honest. And, so I don't go into, oh yeah, I'll do that because a certain manifesto of, 12 white people on a mountain resort told me to do it. I don't think it's how it works. So, how about we try something different? If the other approaches failed, and I gave you some reasons, maybe there's a different approach that could make us successful. So, but wait, when I say a different approach, some of you might say, TK, aren't you replacing one silver bullet with another? Oops, it's quite true, really. It really needs to be a different approach, not just a different method. So I may surprise you by saying that the first step in this approach is a radical idea. Maybe let's be honest for a change. Possibly most organizations aren't really ready for the transformational change. And not many people are willing to speak truth to power to say that. What if your job title is Agile something, right? So this is a part of your identity. You're there to do the Agile part, and saying to the organization that you aren't ready, it doesn't feel that secure. Some people are ready to be sold easily on solutions when it comes to transformational change. But maybe it's just too easy. Maybe it's time to face the music and really work on the basics. So just acknowledge the fact that, the organization isn't really there. And throughout my life, when I look back at the clients I worked with or organizations I've been a part of as a permie, I could clearly see it. But I rarely was brave enough to say, that won't work. I know that you hired me to do that, but I need to do something else. Well, I guess it's a positive thing that I have my own business now. It's a bit easier to say to the clients, even though it might mean that I will not get their business. So what next? What's this different approach? Well, it's much easier to start a petrol engine or a diesel when it's warm. In fact, when you look at it, I don't know, you might be into engineering or not, but you may have a car or not. But starting a cold engine is really quite a violent act. And I think this is the same with organizations. When you're trying to implement a change and the organization is just cold, not ready to accept it, it would be great to have a way of gingerly raising the temperature, the warm and fuzzy feeling of change. So when the time comes, you can just add fuel, turn on the ignition, and crank the initial rotation. So the engine just starts itself. It's like the stop systems in cars. It's just so smooth when your engine's at the operating temperature, isn't it? Compared to what happens in the morning in the winter. Some people, hopefully less and less of new cars. So the simple thing that we're doing in Humble Associates is we start really, really basic. Inspect and adapt to continuously improve. Inspect and adapt to continuously improve. When you think about it, it's Kaizen is really simple. Not many people will deny that it's very beneficial. I find it hard to remember someone that will say with a straight face, there's nothing to improve in how they work and what the organization does and stuff. There's always, when they really you get their trust, you will already see, okay, there's always a need for improvement in anything you do. And I guess we all know that, and this is what our method of work is a part of. The challenge is, I think, as people working with the Agile philosophy of work, maybe we take things for granted. We're taking things for granted that there's a retrospective, a review, that, most importantly, you've got cadences. Most organizations actually don't work like that. They either have, projects and it's like, oh, project, let's do it. Crisis, oh my God, deadline. Or, for instance, they just work operationally, just toiling at the same task over and over again. This cadence idea is a bit of a new invention, but I think it's just absolutely great. Oh, I've got a comment. Transformation is triggered often by top managers. We need to change the organization. What can be the test to check if the experience is feasible to achieve? In other words, how to check if the organization is ready. That's a good one. I think what I tend to look at is the reasons why the organization may want to go through a transformational change, like, for instance, enabling a new way of work. What's pushing them to do that, and how much? What's the sense of urgency there? Is it really when you ask the why questions, you may get, and it often happens in banks, lagging companies, that it's just a fashion. Everyone's doing it, so I'm doing it too. Chances are they're not ready. But possibly there's an organization going through the crisis, and they must, because the market really demands it. Or maybe it's like really there's a huge tumultuous atmosphere of a difficult culture at work. And when you have that, you might be at a tipping point. But the question is, does the majority of the organization really acknowledge that it's needed? I don't think there's a checklist. There never is. It's a complex and adaptive system. So, I could ask the same question of when do you know the fruit is good for eating, right? It's probably because it's, because you have the experience seeing the organizations enough, seeing the plants enough that you can actually see. So my answer is, it's not that it depends, but you really need to observe. So going back to what I have here about the cadence and about inspecting and adapting, I think most organizations don't really have the ability just to implement it from the go. So, but there's a very cool framework that I would like to maybe introduce to some of you, or maybe remind you that it exists because it's not used enough, actually. It's called Lean Change Management. I found it a couple of years ago. I can't remember the author's name. He's affiliated with the Management 3.0 crowd and Happy Melly. This is an experiment-based change method that I think we've applied quite successfully, and a lot of people do. I think it's not appreciated enough nowadays, and I'll walk you through how it works, and you can easily find information about it. It's actually quite simple. So you can actually see it on the diagram. It says start here. So it says to start with insights. Now, what insights are observable facts about the organization. For instance, you can measure with value stream mapping or value stream analysis how tasks and elements of the process are being done. You can detect waste. You can do surveys, both qualitative and quantitative. You can get data. So you start the cycle by generating insights in some form of data. Now, then you go into options. And options are, first of all, you have to make a decision. What is it that you want to experiment on? And second, you find ways of changing your insights from data into something you want. For instance, you would like to reduce lead time on producing some of your products. Well, that's great. What are the options to hopefully change it? And the key here is these options should actually be small. As like this story of, it's a joke really, about a mechanic, a marine mechanic on a cruise ship. So, no one can, and again, it's an engine metaphor, huh? Interesting. No one can start the engine, and they try and finally get someone. It comes in for 1 hour. They spend 50 minutes just looking at things, inspecting. Then they take a hammer, just bang on one piece of equipment, and the engine just starts. And then they charge the owner £20,000, and the owner is just like quite aggravated by the fact of why so much? Can you give me a breakdown? And the engineer says, it's not, it's £1,000 for using the hammer and 19,000 for knowing where to use it. And I think this framework works in a similar way. You really spend the time in finding small opportunities for change, and in the options, you try to select these. Then you go to the next hexagon, the experiments. Now, this framework is based on experimentation. So an experiment is a hypothesis-driven, safe-to-fail, small change. My hypothesis is if I let people work from home for 2 weeks, chances are they will be more productive than if I get them to be at the office for 2 days a week. So let's design the experiment in a controlled fashion to validate this hypothesis, or maybe disprove it. So what you do is you prepare the experiment. So you get a team, say, okay, would you like to work from home for 2 weeks? Yeah. And then make sure you know what you're measuring. Introduce the experiment. So, we're starting at the 2 weeks. And after the 2 weeks, we're reviewing the effects of it. And then we decide if we validated the hypothesis or not. If we validated the hypothesis, well, chances are this may be like a pinch point that may really make a difference in the company. Or maybe We haven't really validated it. It's either denied or inconclusive, which means we can experiment and search for another small change that may make a difference. So, and then you rinse and repeat. You find new insights, get new options, start new experiments. Now, the way we do it with our clients is we operate this cycle on a 4-week cadence with a team of people that I'm going to describe next. And you can really do a lot of small changes in this manner. The great thing about it is it takes some time to teach. We usually take like 2 of these 4-week iterations to be able to make an organization do it themselves. But really, it helps because it can radiate change. So what we're doing is we are setting up teams. We call them change groups or transformation task forces, depending on the circumstance. And what happens is we ask these people to form these groups and then operate this change cycle. Now, obviously, at first, we're helping them to do it. I'm not saying heavy-handed, but we're doing our best to teach them the cycle. It's more important to learn how the cycle works in practice than just to make radical change from the start. But over time, what happens if a group of people operates this cycle, everyone starts talking about it. The atmosphere for change radiates out from the team. It radiates like, the temperature in the engine. This is what we do to heat the organization up. Or shall I say warm the organization up for change? Now, to have a proper change group, what you might want to have is people from various levels of the organization. It's, we don't want to reinforce silos. We don't want to reinforce unnecessary hierarchies. So the way we're constructing these transformation task forces is from various levels of the organization. It's usually a group between 6 and 8 people. And through operating the cycle, they can actually do these experiments. So typically, in a 4-week cycle, we see these groups doing between 2 and 3 experiments with a size like this. There's usually someone or a pair that we're helping become the facilitators of the group. And we're really working quite hard, and I think, we're really working quite deliberately on the fact that we really want them to irradiate the change throughout the organization. People need to see the change happening, especially in these organizations that aren't ready, that are like these seized engines. Nothing really moves, and there's only the grooves that have been made through years of similar operations. There's these processes that no one really knows when they're there. This is how you heat it up. At least this is how we do it. Oh, there's a question from Michelangelo. What would be your best advice to a company that's interested in experimenting with organizational changes? Well, if the organization is interested, my advice would be to try. Now, when it comes to organizational changes, they can be understood in a multitude of ways. One is changing people's roles and their positions inside the organization. That's a very difficult topic, I believe, because people's identities and their whole personas are tied to these roles and such. So if that's the case, my advice would be to when it comes to experimentation, it's probably best to start in a part of the organization that's the most excited. As with any change, and I think, even if you look at the classic approaches like the 8 steps of the Kotter model, just finding some quick wins, finding a part of the organization that would like to go through change would really help. the more radical the change is, the better it can work. So for one of our clients, we were working with a unit particularly difficult. And the problem was that this is still that this unit is the biggest revenue generator. It's like a kingdom on its own inside the organization. A very impenetrable bunch of people, led by a group of leaders that have been together for at least 10 years, and some of them have like a 30-year or 40-year career within the company, and for most of them it's their first job, even if they're nearing retirement. So this was the only way we could help them to warm them up a bit. And but the organization wanted to experiment with other changes, like for instance making an organizational change experiment. So we said that let's do a bit of a skunkworks experiment. I don't know if you've heard about skunkworks. It's a department or a unit in Lockheed Martin that they didn't reinvent aviation, but they constructed some odd-looking planes that were really successful. Even they're now working on the F-35. They're machines of war. But the thing was, they created a separate unit, placed the troublemakers there, and gave them free rein, because this is sometimes what experimentation is all about. And you can only do it when you really invest into doing it where people are excited or create something separate. We wouldn't ever try it in this difficult unit that we spoke about. The question: do you tie these task force changes to company strategy to illustrate the impact of the change has, and why it exists? Now that's a good question. Not at first. You see, the problem with the strategy of the company is it depends on the size of the organization, I guess. When it's a smaller organization and the very senior leaders are involved in the task force, I would say yes. In the clients we're working on, it's more about a bottom-up approach, or I would say middle-up, because a lot of these people are actually line managers, not senior managers, but it's usually that the group holds junior managers, line managers, and individual contributors. At one point, it's best to actually align to the company strategy, but I wouldn't recommend starting on it straight away because it causes too much pressure on the group, and their first mission is to learn how to operate the cycle. Again, another car analogy. It's like you're constructing a vehicle and its first purpose is just to drive. Once you're comfortable with the vehicle and you know how to drive it, you can actually go where you need to go. But, first get comfortable. And the question here is, sometimes after a good beginning, some top managers get scared. How do you deal with it? Well, something that happened to me today. Okay, so I'm, talking off the head here. I hate to say it, but sometimes I'm trying to find a different word for peer pressure. But I'll just say it, right? Sometimes when there's enough positive atmosphere around change, and someone gets cold-footed, it's easy to invite them in when he sees everyone's really enthusiastic about that. So we had a situation today when everyone was really enthusiastic, but the CEO wasn't really, got a bit scared of the language. And, once we left the board meeting, what happened was the rest of the board managed to, convince the CEO that's actually the right way to go. So hopefully we'll be able to close to open the new chapter in the contract later this week. But separate thing. Some people ask me, okay, well, DK, so when does it end? And I say never. It just becomes a part of your DNA. Why would you abandon continuous improvement? The word continuous means that you're constantly doing it. So it's a mind-blowing thing for some people. Most people actually. It's like, what? We hired you, and you're telling us you'll be here forever. What we're saying we're teaching this group to exist forever, and our support will taper down in such a way. But for people, it's just completely revolutionary that there will be a constant effort of inspecting and adapting. And yes, if it's implementing the agile ways of working, it can be folded into Scrum and retrospectives and such. But even then, I've seen that these groups persisted in the organization because there's always some systemic change to be tackled. And I think it's quite important to recognize that change just becomes a part of how you do things. So in this case, it's like I remember someone told me a story once. Some also iterative change expert. They were working in the NHS or for the NHS, and he told me a story how a nurse had like a moment of serendipity, and she got it. And what she said is, "Oh, now I actually have two jobs. One is doing my job, and the other is improving the way I do my job." And I think it's a brilliant, simple explanation of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to think on this meta level that it's just not enough for you to do what you do. You really need to constantly be thinking on how to improve it. Because if you're not moving forward and improving what you're doing, you're lagging behind. And that's how the modern world works. So, does it still make sense for you? After all this organizational change, the the company or the organization will be a different place. After they've been doing it for months and years, even if it's ready for transformational change, for instance, adopting the new ways of working, maybe there will be no need. Maybe, just maybe, with the continuous improvement and experimentation, implementing things like Scrum, Lean, just may see something like the people that are beginning their journey might do. It's like, if you look at that from a perspective of the organization that's used to change and used to continuous improvement, adopting a certain set of practices, rules, prescriptions that someone invented seems silly. Why would you need that? Do you really think that, in the organizations like, I don't know, Spotify, Netflix, Monzo, Agile is a topic of conversation? Do they really mention it by name? Or is it just the way that they work? Is it that, maybe this is how they got unstuck with change? Maybe just they didn't notice that through constant improvement, through constant thinking about the way they work, the changes happened for them. Through more impactful experiments, through being able to really emphasize with people, through really radiating change, it might happen that you'll end up in a place that you don't really need the things that you thought you needed in the first instance. Maybe when you approach the ride again, when you're tall enough, it no longer appeals to you. Maybe you just want to go somewhere else and explore something else. That's the dream, but it's not always easy. So that's how we work, the Humble Associates. I'm quite privileged to be a part of a great group of coaches, and we make change less challenging for our clients. Sometimes it's actually quite challenging for us.